Welcome to this week's episode of Automated, broadcasting live from whenever we recorded this from our global studios in San Francisco's Mission District. We're surrounded by LLM companies that have raised $14 and are willing to spend it all, and homeless people who are taking advantage of all the free services. This, of course, is Automated, our weekly podcast where at Polymath Robotics, we talk about robots, how to build them, some silly ones we make up, and then talk about issues facing the robotics industry today. I, of course, am your host, Stefan Sells-Oxmacher, CEO with the shortest and most pronounceable last name in the known universe. Sitting across from me is a gentleman wearing a smartwatch and a Polymath t-shirt. It could be a mirror. It could be my co-founder. Sir, who are you?
Yeah, on the topic of t-shirts, there's probably going to be a LinkedIn post. A good friend of mine put together a AI-generated image from one of our episodes of Bambi crossed over with Terminator. It looks perfect. Excellent.
I think we should post it as a Teespring and make money doing it. I know someone who did that once during the Silicon Valley disaster.
Oh, you do know someone?
Yeah. Though apparently the t-shirts were pretty crappy, so that guy who hired someone to design the shirts, never bought one himself. But hey, I made $1,500. This, of course, is Automated. This is our weekly podcast we do in two sections. The first of which we live invent into existence a robot, and the second we talk about some sort of topic in robotics today. Ilya, what are we going to talk about today? Are we going to talk about deep algorithms? Are we going to talk about cutting edge controls models? Are we going to, redesign circuitry live on air?
We're going to talk about trickle-down economics,
AKA
specifically VCs.
And the outlook for VCs and some funny anecdotes from, honestly, even just the last week and a half.
It's a fun time in the industry.
All right, so let's get it started. Let's play a game. So for the game here, we each draw a card. Ilya will kind of simulate being the business co-founder by drawing a business use case that we need to build a robot for.
All right. I've picked kitchen.
Kitchen robots are always successful. I don't think there's been a failure in this space. If there's one thing people want in their kitchen, it's a really expensive thing that saves a minimal amount of effort.
You know what they call kitchen robots that work? Appliances.
Oh, that hurts me because it's true. I think the technology is pretty obvious. Robotic arm.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
We're going to make fun of so many companies who are working in this space currently.
I don't think we'll be able to get a job at any of the failed companies that have tried to do robotic arms.
In the kitchen?
Yeah.
I love it. Like, from a technical standpoint, I always have these great videos where they're like, we hired a world-class chef to prepare an omelet. And we motion captured every motion he did. And then we replayed it exactly with the humanoid arm and humanoid grippers. And look, it made an omelet. And it's like, yeah, sure. But what if your egg is slightly smaller?
For those of you who
slightly bigger.
For those of you who aren't robotic arm people, the hard thing about like factories and robotic arms is parts presentation. Yeah. Basically, bringing parts that the robot arm has to interact with in such a uniform way that it can literally just reach the same place, do the same motion to pick something up, and literally move somewhere else to the same exact relative position to place the car door. Eggs, for some reason, aren't uniform. Funny enough, actually,
none of our food is really that perfectly uniform. If it is, probably don't eat it.
As not a genetic engineer, it seems easier to me to genetically engineer eggs to have chickens to have perfectly uniform eggs than it is to build a robot arm that can just deal with the eggs.
Can I give you an easier option? At your eggplant, just filter out the eggs that are exactly the same size. And these are robot approved eggs, which you have to buy on a subscription model along with your humanoid arms.
It'd be like the Juicero.
Exactly.
The cold pressed juice thing where you have to buy the bag of pre-cut up, pre-pressed juice to then put in your $1,000 appliance.
Just like the Juicero, it will be a huge success.
So, there's been a lot of dumb ideas in this space, and I think it's going to be hard to find one that's dumber. Like, you've talked about motion capture ones. Another one that there was a company for a while that was using robot arms to like cut food. Because obviously
such the robotic horse solution.
Yeah.
For cars.
A 6-off arm and a knife is not the best way to cut a tomato.
So actually, so diverting, maybe related to kitchen, right? A real effort here is to improve the efficiency of meatpacking plants.
Yep.
Because horrendous working conditions had huge problems during COVID. And Americans demand meat.
Yeah,
so you can't, it's not an optional industry.
I need 15 meals a day.
Right, exactly. So one of the surprisingly difficult things that there's been zero automation for is they've taken, the assembly line approach from cars. So the carcasses are moving on an overhead hook.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys who are working...
How does Rocky fit into this? Is he boxing each
he's
of them?
Boxing the frozen meat.
Do we need a robot arm just to punch them?
And these guys have these really razor sharp knives, and they've practiced to carve the thing as it's driving by them to get a particular like flank cut or whatever, right? They've tried to automate that with robot arms and knives. The problem is there's a lot of very high frequency feeling of what the resistance is to figure out what muscle group you're cutting through, or what, like, have you hit the bone or whatever? And the animals are just not consistent enough that, to your point about parts presentation, it has been multiple PhDs have died on this beach to try to get meat packing even somewhat automated, and it's still zero. It's basically zero.
I fear that we're getting way too close into real products. There's a number of people who are looking at robots for food packaging facilities. Yeah. And that's dumb because it's reasonable and makes sense.
Yes, exactly.
And it seems buildable enough, and who cares about that?
The meat packing, not so much, but like repeatable products like, I don't know, Twinkies?
Never.
Fine.
Never. Who needs that?
Yeah.
So I think this needs to be a home kitchen robot arm.
Home kitchen robot arm. All right.
Yeah. Actually, what it could be? Okay, boom. So I'm not much of a cook, as in I cook a meal a month at most, rounding up by an order of 2.
That's how you keep your figure.
That's how I keep my rotundly muscular figure. I think what I really need when I'm cooking, I have my recipe, and I don't necessarily need all the things out to start off with, and I don't want them sitting out because I have the feeling that if I have raw meat sitting out for an extra 35 seconds, it's suddenly going to spoil and go bad.
Yes,
which is reasonable.
So that's how the botulism gets you.
Yep. So I want a robot arm to get things out of my fridge right before I need them while making a recipe.
I think this is one of those, vending machine would work better sort of situations.
Robot, but I don't my wife doesn't like the look of vending machines in the kitchen. Believe me, I've tried. So I'm more thinking like a robot arm that basically opens the fridge door, finds the thing that I need next, and pulls it out.
So hilariously, the most, maybe not, it kind of makes sense. The hardest part about that whole thing, even going back to the PR2, the PR2 had an example app where you could go and open a fridge door and bring you a beer. But that was only feasible because all the beers were carefully stacked up.
Yeah.
There's a thing you do as a human that you don't really notice is when you're reaching into a fridge, you'll kind of subconsciously wiggle your hand around all your things.
So you need
to grab the thing you're actually trying to get.
So maybe it's like an 18 DOF arm that can wiggle.
It's a tentacle at this point.
It's a tentacle. Right? It's a tentacle with a suction cup at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be big in Japan.
It's good for getting a beer out of the fridge and dates.
Yeah. Jeez, wasn't going to make it that clear. So
basically it could be like one of those like the Joby things, which a bunch of balls on an arm.
Yeah.
Twist.
Yeah.
Same guy who made he went from phone stands to flying cars.
Yeah.
Use those things as your arm. So build a whole new discipline of robotics to
grab. Well, actually, Festo, which is an industrial pneumatics company, they do a lot of bio-inspired pneumatic, and they've done a bunch of trunks that can do this sort of thing. But even as a human, you kind of wiggle your hand through the fridge, and knowing the weight of objects and their consistency, you can kind of guess how much you can nudge them without them falling over. So it's actually much more of an intelligence problem than it is a gripper problem.
Yeah.
And that's the trick. It's grabbing an object that's right at the edge of the fridge, not very difficult. Grabbing an object at the back of the fridge, practically impossible.
But why don't you just unload the entire fridge and then grab the thing at the back?
Yeah, I'm sure you'd love that.
Botulism won't get you. If it's out of the fridge, in the fridge within 4 minutes, it doesn't count. Yeah. If it's on my counter for an extra 30 seconds, dead.
How about we replace the fridge shelves with little conveyor belts? So that as the arm reaches in, it conveyors in the right thing.
Lazy Susans that twist around.
Yeah, lazy students. Yeah.
I mean, I think realistically, so you have the tentacle opens the fridge door, and I think I'm not really grabbing like a jug of milk in this. I'm more thinking like, oh, I'm making a breakfast sandwich, so I need a packet of American cheese.
Oh, I was gonna say, make it an easy case. Grab a single egg. So much easier.
Well, then you have to open the egg carton.
Yeah, exactly. I'm kidding. It's like the hardest thing you could grab.
And again, most of the challenge again for this entire use case is whether or not it makes more sense to actively update your iPad recipe list of where you are in the recipes so that the whole thing knows which parts you need next, as opposed to actually getting the thing.
Just LLM it. Just shout at it. I need eggs.
Get me egg.
Get me egg.
Yeah.
And it will return the entire carton. It's not a bad solution.
So tentacle arm, probably mount it on the ceiling, go up and down. This will be way less intrusive than adding a vending machine.
Ceiling mounted. I thought it was a roving base. Well, ceiling mounted.
Oh, it could be roving base. Roving base makes more sense.
Yeah.
Or more practical.
Yes.
What do you think this thing's called?
I mean, I want to say Dr. Octopus, but that has nothing to do with cooking.
Octopus in the kitchen? Kitchen octopus.
Maybe.
And also part of why this is the big vision for the future, as time goes on, it could have more tentacles and it could do more and more things in the kitchen at once. So it could also be stirring things. There could be a tentacle for, flipping things over. Boom. It's a tentacle play. I think the kitchen octopus is coming to a Bed Bath & Beyond near you. Starting price of $350,000. Additional attachments can be bought for a low price of $25,000 a tentacle.
You know what we call this? Sorry, coming back to the name. We call it Jin Yang. From Silicon Valley. He developed an app for 18 ways to cook octopus. The whole thread of this show was he was getting funded because everybody thought he kept saying Oculus. All right. That's the system.
All right. Boom.
So how has the funding world been going for robotics these last few months?
It's pretty complicated. My favorite thing is that people constantly ask us when we're going to fundraise again, or when are we fundraising? Or if you talk to a VC, like, oh yeah, so you're fundraising, right? And I keep on saying, not really. I'm meeting with people and I really don't want to fundraise because it seems hard out there.
Yeah.
For the last 15 months or so, the consistent feedback I've gotten from peers is like, well, you just wait another 3 to 6 months before trying to fundraise. It's really hard right now. It's going to be better in 3 to 6 months, consistently for the last 15 months.
Yeah. And this has nothing to do with interest rates, I'm sure.
Well, it's not just interest rates. I mean, I think there's a whole bunch of SaaS companies that went remote. They then also raised a whole bunch of money in 2021. And they stopped spending a lot of their money because they might have raised $40 million at a $200 million valuation with $3 to $8 million of revenue. And then interest rates went up and it became clear they wouldn't be able to raise $80 million. So last year they all laid off a bunch of people. Now they have 5 to 15 years of runway and they're just chilling and hoping for good times and maybe selling some stuff and hanging out like zombies.
Yeah, zombie companies.
Yeah. A lot of the companies that were for example, the company whose office we sublet is exactly that profile where they've raised, I think in 21, they might have raised $40-50 million. Their team went remote in COVID. They're not coming back. A lot of them moved out all over the country, so they can't go back to being in office. They've, from what I can tell, aren't making the same progress they used to be making. So there's just a whole bunch of venture money tied up in this company that isn't going to give it back, isn't going to get bought, isn't going to whatever. It's just kind of chilling. And I think that there's downstream effects of that where the VCs who need to get that money back and give it to their LPs so the LPs can give it back to them aren't able to complete the first part of that step, which means the LPs are already over allocated in venture.
So let's step back a bit for our listeners. So let's define a few things. Mm-hmm. VCs and LPs, who's doing what? What are their interests?
So a venture capitalist, fundamentally, or at least what I'm talking about when I talk about VCs, are investors in theoretically high risk, high growth companies, with the bet being that each investment should be able to 25 to 100x within about 10 years. And the thought being that if they make 10 of these bets, 5 or 6 of them will go to 0, 2 to 3 of them will 3 to 5x, and 1 of them will return the entire fund. VCs themselves, some of them have their own money, but they get money from limited partners or LPs. And those are pension funds and whoever, big kind of institutional groups of money where they might allocate 2% of their overall assets to this really high risk, but possibly exciting and high growth asset class. Now, the problem is 2% seems pretty good back in 2018. Some people even got really excited. Venture went 2.5%. But then the whole rest of the market, shrank at a couple of different times. So people had a certain amount of money deployed and suddenly they had their 4% allocated in venture. So they were literally over allocated. Now that the market's come back, that's kind of fixed itself a little bit. But a lot of these LPs already have money in the venture ecosystem and aren't going to put any more in until they get some of that money back.
Yeah. And the returns tend to be every 3 years or so.
Yeah. Each fund tends to be deployed over the course of 3 years with the hope that it's returned with a profit in 10 years. The problem is basically nobody's going public anymore. I think the numbers of companies going public or unicorns being minted and being public are down like 90% year over year.
Yeah, I heard something about that.
So like every company founded after say 2015 who hasn't gone out of business or already gone public is basically just like hanging on and waiting for good times to come back. There's like a hangover going on in the broader market, but especially in VC land.
We think the good times are coming back next quarter?
Oh, always. We're always 1 quarter away. Yeah. So before 2020, there had started to be a lot of investment in robotics and deep tech, kind of fundamentally because yield went away from SaaS. Now, like SaaS valuations are down. So yield in SaaS is theoretically back. There's still a lot of stupid stuff happening in AI. There's companies raising money to build wrappers on top of OpenAI that like, who knows how that will work out. But functionally, a whole bunch of VCs saw a lot of exciting promises from robotics, 8 years ago. Basically, give me $100 million and I'll make you $1 trillion empire that will solve all autonomy forever. And none of that came true. And now people are just kind of wait and seeing about the whole space.
Is there a good winner in the autonomous robotics space over the last few years we can even point to?
So there's companies where like investors have made money, but there's not really companies who have gone and taken over the world.
Yeah, I'm thinking the only big acquisition I could think of is iRobot being bought by Amazon.
But iRobot is a 20-year-old company. I mean, like Cruise was a really good acquisition in that like it was a company that raised $18 million. I think its terminal valuation at its last round that it raised pre-acquisition was like $80 million and it was bought for $600. That's a great investment. But then there are companies who've raised $4 billion and like, or Zoox raised $2.5 billion, was acquired for $1.5 billion. So a lot of this stuff just like didn't work out. And VCs are starting to think like, maybe this robotic space is different and not going as well as we thought. So like there's still people writing seed checks, but I was trading emails this weekend with a friend who has a functioning robotics company. They have a product, they have robots that move in the range of like maybe 5+ robots. They are doing at least POCs, maybe not like sustained deployments, but POCs. Can't raise $2 million.
Yeah.
Can't raise like 2 on 10, which for the record in 2021, people, we winked at some people and raised more money on better terms than that, which is a crazy thing about this current market. Like that particular person said he's met with something like 110 VCs over the last 6 months. He's particularly qualified. I don't feel like I should share his stuff without him being on the podcast, but he's particularly well qualified, had previously raised a lot of money for a robotics company, and is being told that maybe a Series A requires him to have $2 million in ARR.
Which is extremely unusual. Because what do we
That would be a big success for SaaS.
Yeah.
And in SaaS, you don't have to build hardware and reinvent obstacle detection and this, that, and the other.
Yeah. Yeah. What the goalposts seem to have been shifting on us and on the entire industry over the last year.
Which is part of why I keep on avoiding fundraising.
Yeah.
I actually, from my CEO coach, I heard a great line that like, there's enough robotics companies out there who are struggling and dying fundraising that it's poisoning the well, where like we're doing actually pretty good. And VCs are so used to desperate robotics companies willing to do anything for a buck that like it's poisoning the conversations that we're having with them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So what do you do if you're a robotics company in this field right now? How do you win?
I mean, the hard thing is you got to figure out a way to get breakout growth without a lot of money. I think like a lot of robotics companies have to deal with the fact that they're going to be lucky to have $2 to $4 million in total to get to a point where they have both a proven technology and a proven business.
Yeah.
And that's hard. I mean, if on the upper bound of that, you can raise a $4 million seed, you can't spend $1 million on label data. You can't spend $1 million on hardware. You have to probably have $100,000 of revenue by the time you've spent $1 million. You need to get $1 million by the time you even want to start talking to VCs. Like there's still going to be silly stuff that raises for reasons that I don't understand. Absolutely. But it's seeming weird, harder and harder and weirder and weirder.
Refueling in space.
Yeah, this friend I was talking to specifically was told by one VC he was too early. That VC had invested in a company that does space refueling, which, is a very mature market these days. Yeah. A lot of people use that service. Yeah, like it actually, there's an interesting article I read this weekend that an early stage deep tech fund decided to shut down and return their capital. So there's a firm called Countdown Capital.
Ironic name in retrospect.
And like the GP's kind of goal and mission was like frontier tech and hard tech in the national interest. So like robots building solar farms and robots for defense and nuclear reactors and whatever. Had a first fund of maybe $5 million, a second fund of $15 to $30 million. It was leaked by TechCrunch this weekend that having deployed about, I don't know, less than a third of the fund, he decided that there wasn't a model and the market wasn't good enough and that he was just going to return the rest of his LP's money.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me because I would think, being a little naive in this space, that VCs are kind of pretty incentivized to deploy the money that they have on hand.
Totally. I mean, they totally are. I mean, I think the thing is, I mean, the line that was leaked that I liked the most in the TechCrunch article was essentially, this doesn't seem like it's a good use of the LP's money, and it doesn't seem like it's a good use of the GP's time. And he basically thinks there's a better chance for him to have more returns elsewhere. And now, like, specifically part of his thesis change was that he didn't think that small sector focused funds could compete and win in this space. And that like there's no value in there being an independent $15 million AUM Countdown Capital in a world where Andreessen Horowitz has I think a $400 million American Dynamism fund. But I think it's pretty telling that not only does that seem hard, and he made some good bets. I think it was in Hadry and a couple other companies. It's pretty telling that like, oh, this whole space is so hard. Our companies are struggling so much to fundraise that there's no special thing for us, that he decided to return funding. And like, I know off the record that there's a couple of other funds in this space who are struggling to raise new funds and are basically only protecting their current companies. I know of another frontier tech fund that announced it was winding down new operations last month.
Yeah.
And that was a large one. Aside one that we were hoping might be interested in writing a Series A check for us that kind of left the field.
Kind of a surprise for us, for sure.
And there's just a lot of this stuff going on where like funds are disappearing.
There was a good anecdote. It's your story to tell about one of our recent investor updates.
Yeah. A couple, maybe like 3 months ago, I sent a blast out to a bunch of VCs that I knew, and something like 5% of the GPs' emails bounced. And like, you know,
GPs are
general partners at a VC fund.
It's pretty important folk.
Yeah. Like, these are folks who like sit on company boards. Them getting laid off means some other GP is taking their board positions. Them getting laid off means like the fund is consolidating management fees in previous funds so as to be able to keep the lights on for longer. And I'd say more than half of those GPs had not yet updated their LinkedIn. So it definitely was not they quit. It was more like, oh, you got fired, Mr. GP or Mrs. GP in some cases. Another note that I saw recently is a VC I know responded to an ask of me trying to get some pitch practice with, hey, can you introduce me to some LPs to help raise my next fund? And on that list of LPs that they asked for, there was another investor who I know can't raise funds either. It's just this whole weird little self-referential world where like
systemic
the hard tech VCs are suffering. And to be fair, all of VCs probably are to some extent, but the hard tech ones are especially.
I mean, it makes sense why now there's this snowball effect, because it looks like LLMs are the one bright spot, or AI kind of, especially language model AI.
But given the stuff that we've seen nearby, my hunch is a lot of that stuff will go to zero in the next 18 months as well.
But it's the current only refuge.
Yeah.
Right. It causes this almost snowball effect where more money's coming into it, which draws more people, which pulls more money into it.
Because the hard thing about VC is you can't just make the right bets. You have to make bets that other people also make, so you don't have to entirely be on the hook for some company's success.
Yeah.
Like unless you're able to write $10 million, a series of 8-figure checks, you can't bet on something that's too weird away from the rest of the market.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think in terms of what this means for robotics in 2024, fundraising's still going to be hard. I don't think this year we're going to see some magical bright spot where the world gets easier. I think you're going to need to be focused on short-term margin. You're going to need to be focused on getting something out there that makes more money than it costs and covers more of your engineers than not.
Yeah, be as efficient as with your capital as you can be.
Yeah, because like there might not ever be more capital.
And I mean, the thing that we try to pitch ourselves as is, in a lot of cases, we'll calculate out some platform fee for our customers.
Mhm.
And we'll try to equate it to the average yearly salary of a good engineer.
Yep.
To kind of show, hey, you could employ 5 people to build what we're building, or you could pay 1/5 of that and pay us directly and get the same or better quality.
Yep. And with way less technical risk.
Right.
And frankly, without paying to redevelop tech that is not differentiated and is fundamentally not sellable at the end of the day.
Yeah. So I think we luckily are in a very good position in this sort of market because we're there to help accelerate other groups in these sort of cost saving efforts. But the rest of the robotics industry has to think of how can they do more with less, or find a very small niche they can attack with a small amount of funds.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say like if you can't build a full stack robot with 4 people, you can't think about building a full stack robot.
Yeah.
Like if your thing is
4 people sharing a room existing on ramen, to be clear.
Yeah. Like and by full stack robot, I mean a thing that works in production.
Yeah.
Maybe it's hand built, but like can go work in production environments. If that's not possible in your use case because the robotics involved is too complicated, you need to find someone else for hardware. You need to find someone else like us for autonomy. You need to find someone else for every single part to have a chance of actually making it to market and surviving the times that we're in. Now the flip side is the companies who survive the next 3 years are going to take over the world.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of companies that survived the 2008 to 2011 time period where they were garbage by modern standards, but they became worth, 9 and 10 figures and like made massive returns for the founders, the team members, the investors, but they had to survive the one foot in front of the other.
You got to make it through. Yeah. Because this will improve overall, and the demand for actual robots hasn't actually changed that much.
And it's actually kind of crazy increasing. Like we're having people talk to us about automating things who you'd never have thought cared about it or wanted it. We have clients wanting to build new projects faster than we'd ever would have guessed. The problem is it's the funding the development effort of it.
Yeah. Particularly for us, Australia, Europe, North America has been very successful because there's similar pressures there and really across the world. But cost of living has increased, inflation is high.
Yep.
Finding
labor is
people
short.
is difficult. Yeah.
People are less happy about immigrants.
Yeah.
All of which is just making labor harder and harder.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of opportunity to go automate things if you can get a product to market. And that's what we want to help you with at Polymath.
Yeah. Just to give in our last few minutes kind of a counterexample, which shocked me personally, is one of the clients we're talking to does mining basically. And when they were looking at their costing efforts, they realized they could save more in just pure diesel cost by just having their operators not idle their engines all the time than they would in any kind of autonomy program.
And in this particular example, the company has a bunch of people in a remote location and it's hot outside and the people don't want to be hot and they don't want to look like they're lazy good for nothings. So they keep the engine on whether they're moving or not.
Yeah.
And cumulatively with their 80 vehicle fleet, if they just turned off the engine when they weren't moving and turned it back on when it was time to move, they would save $8 million in diesel per year.
Yeah.
A shocking amount of money.
Huge. I think we calculated it was like 1/6 of a tanker, like an oil tanker or something like that. Like a ridiculous amount of fuel. But yeah, so all that to say that if you're thinking of starting a robotics company, which I highly recommend, despite all the scary things we've just said.
It's the most meaningful work you can do. It's the fundamental
it's
linchpin
wonderful
technology for the next 50 years.
Yes.
If you can get there.
Yes. But think about building something that has a very particular value chain that you can very clearly express and isn't robots for robots' sake, like making omelets with robot arms, but is actually...
That one's a good idea, though.
Oh, it's a fantastic idea. Jin Yang for the kitchen.
Yep.
Definitely. No, really try to focus in on something that is scalable from a very small scale and can be cash positive as quickly as possible.
Yep.
It doesn't seem to be another way.
And one of the best ways to do that is by working with Polymath.
Absolutely.
And that being said, Ilya, what are we up to next week?
We're at CES.
We're going to be riding through tunnels.
That's right.
That's the primary thing.
Oh, speaking of which, I posted on an internal Slack, but somebody is doing package delivery via underground pipes.
I think they probably listened to our podcast and stole the idea.
You have to demand a royalty payment.
Yeah.
Don't stop. go
Yeah.
directly to collecting cash payments.
I think we should definitely take the practice of patent trolls and email any company that does anything like us and demand a $20 billion a year royalty.
We'll be reasonable. We'll accept 80% of the profit.
So we'll be at CES. Come visit us in the North Hall. We'll have some comfy seating to hang out in. We'll let you drive some robots. We'll have a number of them. We learned recently that we have as big of a robot fleet driving as many miles per year as a 500-person company that I would not name or snarkily post on their LinkedIn. So maybe you can come by and play with half those robots.
Yeah, so no episode next week, but week after, maybe we'll do a CES retrospective.
Or maybe we'll do an episode at CES. You don't know that.
I almost certainly we will not.
All right, so we'll be talking about CES in 2 weeks. Thanks so much for joining. We'll talk to y'all soon.
See you next time.